Imagine a speech so powerful that it could have changed the course of history, but which was silenced, ignored, and even erased from the official records. Martin Luther King Jr., known worldwide for his speech, "I Have a Dream," also carried within himself words that were even more profound, more uncomfortable, and more challenging. Words that did not please the powerful, not even his own allies. On April 4th, 1967, exactly 1 year before his assassination, Luther King took the pulpit of Riverside Church in New York City and delivered a message that few know. It was not just a sermon. It was a prophetic cry against the Vietnam War, against militarism, against the moral hypocrisy of America. And for this speech, he would pay a very high price, not with applause, but with isolation, surveillance, and betrayal. This speech was not televised in prime time. It was not printed in newspaper headlines with reverence, and it did not become the name of a street or a holiday. Quite the opposite. The media called him a traitor. Political leaders cut ties. Even figures from the black movement who had previously walked alongside him began to criticize him. But why so much discomfort? Because Luther King dared to connect the pain of black people on the streets of Selma with the mutilated bodies of American and Vietnamese soldiers, he said. "The greatest purveyor of violence in the world today is my own government." That was too much. It was like turning the tables on interests that were comfortably served. Luther King was not just calling for racial equality. He was exposing the structure of global oppression, and that, for many, was intolerable. That day, Luther King declared that he could no longer remain silent in the face of war. He said, "A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death." It was a speech of a pastor, but also of a revolutionary. And when he linked the suffering of Vietnamese children with the silence of the American church, he made it clear that his struggle was no longer just civil, it was spiritual, moral, and universal. Luther King began to be seen as a threat to the status quo. From that point on, he was no longer just a dreamer. He was a man with a denunciation, with a conscience that refused to be tamed. This speech is so impactful because it reveals a Martin Luther King who does not fit into the frames that history has tried to impose on him. He was not just a peacemaker. He was also the troublemaker. He was not just he was also the one who pointed a finger at the empire. And when he spoke that night, he knew what he was risking. He knew he was signing his own sentence, but he spoke anyway. Because for him, silence was complicity, and he had seen too much to keep quiet. This is the Luther King that many do not know. The Luther King who, instead of being remembered only for his dream, needs to be remembered also for his warning, for the courage to confront a nation that refused to look in the mirror. Today, more than half a century later, the words of this speech echo with renewed force. Wars continue, inequalities deepen, and the dream of justice often seems even more distant. But perhaps if we relive this Luther King, the one who disturbs, the one who pays the price for telling the truth, perhaps then we will not only admire his story, but be inspired to continue his mission. Because the true tribute we can pay to Martin Luther King Jr. is not in statues or quotes on social media. It is in our willingness to do what he did. Speak out, even when the world prefers silence. And so I ask you, did you know this speech? And what do you think Luther King would say about today's world?